Today we will start with Unit 8 of our subject Introduction to Deep Learning. The machine learning models, they can be categorized into two categories. One is the discriminative model and another is the generative model. What is the difference between these two, the discriminative model and the generative model? Generative model basically, which is our main topic here in this unit. So, generative model is a machine learning model in which, suppose we give an image, then similar to it other images can be created or can be categorized. So, that we will call a generative model. And in discriminative model, we will distinguish between different types of images. Let us say we have, for an example, we are talking about some movies. If we prefer watching action movies, so we have watched some action movie, so similar to that, other action movies will be recommended to us. That is a function of generative model. While discriminative model, it will distinguish between the action movies or other type of movies. Like it will distinguish between the action movie from the comedy movies, from the horror movies or other sort of movies. So discriminative means it will distinguish between different types of movies, and in generative, similar types of things will be generated. So that is what is basically discriminative model and generative model. So machine learning models, they can be classified into two types, discriminative model and generative model. Discriminative model, it makes a prediction on the unseen data based on the conditional property, and it can be used either for classification or for regression problem statements. Suppose we are given certain images, then to classify them into different parts to make different cluster of different type of movies. So that will be the function of discriminative model, classification. While a generative model, it focuses on the distribution of a data set to return a probability for a given example. If we are given a particular example, so similar to that, it will return the probability of the other examples. So let us talk about the generative model in detail. So a generative model, it describes how a data set is generated in terms of a probabilistic model. So by sampling from this model, we are able to generate the new data. Like if you're typing a message on your mobile, what happens when you type something? What next you're going to type? Those similar words will start appearing. So this is a function of generative model. While if we are making some sort of calculation, if we have certain marks of a subject of a student, we are calculating the average of them. So obviously the result is going to be same. So this is not a generative model. Generative model is a model in which there is probability of what next can appear. Suppose we have a data set. Let us say it contains images of the horses. We may wish to build a model that can generate a new image of a horse that has never existed. So, but it will still look real. So, because the model has learned the general rules that govern the appearance of a horse, that how does the horse appear. So, similar, if we have certain images of horse, so new images can be generated because our model, it has learned that how does the horse actually look. So, this is a kind of problem that can be solved using the generative modeling. A generative model, it could generate new photos of the animals that look like real animals. While in a discriminative model, it can distinguish between different types of animals, like it can distinguish a dog from a horse or from a cat. So it will distinguish between different types of animals. That is the function of discriminative model. While our generative model that we are talking about here, it will generate the images similar to the image that we have loaded. So basically, our generative model, it will describe that how a data set is generated. In terms, we will talk about this model in terms of probability. So by sampling from this generative model, we can definitely generate new data. So that is what is exactly the generative model. So in case of generative models, to find the conditional probability, let us say we are talking about two different things. We have taken one as x, another one as y. We are generating a new probability. That is, we are generating the probability of y by x. We can estimate the probability py and the likelihood probability, that is px by y, with the help of the training data. And here we can make use of Bayes' theorem that we have studied earlier also, which calculate the posterior probability which we want, that is py by x. So that posterior probability, how will this be calculated? It will be calculated using the Bayes' theorem, which is going to be the product of prior probability and the likelihood probability, and dividing it by the evidence that we have. So we can write down it in terms of probability like py by x that we want to generate for a new image, and it is going to be equal to py multiplied by px by y and dividing it by the probability of x, that is px. So generative model, it finds out the conditional probability which is py by x. So generative models, they are used in unsupervised machine learning as a means to perform tasks like the probability and the likelihood estimation. If we want to if we want to calculate the probability, so there we can use a generative model. If we want to model certain data points, if we are talking about some map on which we are working, we want to model certain data points. So in that case again, we can make use of our generative model. Then to describe the phenomena in data, there we can apply our generative model. Then to distinguish between the classes based on the probability, there we can apply our generative model. So till now we have understood that what is generative model, how is the probability for a new value can be calculated using the Bayes theorem in the generative model. So in generative model, we have understood what is generative model. If we have some images of a particular animal, let's say horse, we can generate similar images of the horse, but which are not real. We don't have the real images. We are generating the new images which are similar to that horse. So that is a function of our generative model. How does it operate? This generative model, it definitely follows a proper procedure to generate the new images. So how does it do that? First, we require a data set which consists of many examples of the entity we are trying to generate. Suppose we are trying to generate the new image of a horse. We already want a training set, a data set, which consists of some examples of that entity. Entity is what? Entity is a particular thing which we are talking about. Like here we are talking about the image of a horse. So that is our entity. So first of all, we require a data set which consists of many examples of the entity that we are trying to generate. This particular data set we will call our training data set, because we are using it to train our model our generative model. Next, each observation, it obviously consists of many features. For like if we are generating using an image generation model, so the features there will be the individual pixel values. If we talk about the image, there we talk about the pixel values that we have in that image. So if we are talking about image generation problem, what are our features? We have to extract the features on the basis of which we will generate a new model. So the features are usually the individual pixel values. Like if we are generating the image of a ball, so what can be our features? The size of the ball, the color of the ball, these can be the features of the ball. So the next thing, first of all, what we want? We want the data set. Second, what we want? We want our observation. It should consist of many features. So it is our goal to build a model which can generate the new set of features that look as if they have been created using the same rules as the original data. If we have some original data, we are generating a new set of features which should look as if they are similar, or they should look similar to our original data. So that is our goal in this particular model. A generative model, it must also be probabilistic. It should not be deterministic. Like if our model is merely doing a fixed calculation, it is not generative model in that case, because the model is producing the same output every time. If we are doing a particular calculation, it will generate the same output. So that is a deterministic value. So our generative model, it is not deterministic. We talk about the probability in our generative model. This model, it must include a random element which influence the individual samples which are generated by the model. The basic difference between the generative model and the discriminative model. Till now, we have understood that what is generative model. So we should be able to distinguish it from the discriminative model. So first of all, generative model, it tackles a more difficult task than the analogous discriminative model. Because our generative model, it is generating new data which is similar to our original data, or which is generating the probability of the similar data that can appear. So the generative model, it tackles a more difficult task as compared to the discriminative model. Generative model, they have a model which has to offer more. So a generative model for images might capture the correlation that like things that look alike. Like boats are probably going to appear near things that look like water. So this is our more complicated distribution. If we are talking about a boat, so we can in that boat, what can appear? It can appear near the water. It can appear, there can be water, there can be a river. So similar things we have to generate when we are talking about a boat. That is a function of generative model. While in discriminative model, it might learn the difference between the sailboat or that are not a sailboat by just looking for a few patterns. So discriminative model, it will distinguish between a boat from other objects. Like it can distinguish a boat from a cruise or from a cargo ship. So that is a function of discriminative model. In discriminative model, it tries to draw boundaries in the data space. If we have certain data, our discriminative model, it will draw boundary between different types of data. While generative model, it tried to model how data is placed throughout our data space. We have a data space, how our data should be placed. That is generative model. So we should understand the difference between the discriminative model and the generative model. Obviously, generative model, it tackles a more difficult task as compared to the discriminative model. Generative model, if we are talking about a boat, it will show us more of boats. It will show us more of objects that are near to the boat, like water, or like they can be ducks or something like that. While a discriminative model, it will just distinguish between a boat from other objects. So that is the difference between the generative model and the discriminative model.